Hi, everybody. This is a tutorial for how to do your Cladistics Dry Lab. So on Blackboard, you want to make sure that you are clicking on Lab Documents. Once you are in Lab Documents, you'll see all of our labs from the past, and you will scroll down to Cladistics Dry Lab. The first thing that I really strongly suggest you watch is this video right here, which is a Bozeman Science video. And Paul Anderson goes into explanation and background on cladograms, which is essentially what we're trying to build here. So we are going to build a cladogram based around seashells. He shows a very elementary type of cladogram using cartoon drawings. And I do encourage you to pause his video at the appropriate parts, make predictions, and really understand how a cladogram is created, because it's really going to help you out with our background and procedures. So our background and procedures is listed here. And there is a lot of background and procedures for the Cladistics Lab. These are the seashells that you're going to be working with today, and we're going to refer to them using their genus name. So you can see they look all different from each other. They have different shapes, sizes. So we're going to try to establish relationships among these seashells. Once you get into the background and the procedures, you're going to see that it goes into the history of classification and why we classify things in science and in biology particularly. What you see right here for figure 1 is you see a cladogram, and a cladogram, you have to imagine that A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H here are species, and they would all come from a common ancestor that would be at the bottom of this cladogram, and that through evolutionary time, these other species would be created. So there would be sort of an ancestor here. And then as you're going through time, which would be this line right here, characteristics change. And every time it branches off, that means that there would be a change in some kind of characteristic. So even up here, this would be an ancestor of F and G. This would be an ancestor of D and E. And right here would be an ancestor of A, B, and C. So H here would be what we would call the outgroup. And if you do not understand that, please go back and watch Paul Anderson's video, because he does go over that. So I'm going to clear out those drawings and scroll down a little bit so you can figure out what the procedure here is. So this is another type of phylogenetic tree. Looks a little bit different than a cladogram because it's more squarish and has brackets to it. But if I get out my annotation tool again, my ancestor would be here. Okay, and that ancestor would branch off at some point to create species H, and there would be an ancestor here. So every time there's sort of a fork in the road, there would be an ancestor, and the ancestor of A and B here would have some sort of trait A that A and B would share, but A and B would be different enough from each other. They would be on different branches. So every time there's like a little sort of intersection, that's where there would be the ancestor of any lines that sort of branch out from that. So let's use a really simple example to illustrate this. If we take a look here, it goes into an example regarding shapes. So here we have 5 shapes, and we see that there are different characteristics here, even with just these shapes. So one of the first characteristics that I notice is that there are different colors. So we have a blue color, and they're calling this other color an orange color. And that's listed here as a characteristic. So we can see that that's going to be something that we would look at if we were to build a cladogram of these shapes. Number of sides is definitely different. We see the side number change twice because it goes from 3 to 4 and then 4 to 5. So that would be 2 changes. There are some shapes that have equal angles. Some shapes do not. So B here definitely does not have equal angles because it has some acute angles and some obtuse angles. And there's a difference in outlines. If you can see, some of the shapes have a double outline and some of the shapes have a single outline. So these characters here, you can really think of them as characteristics. And if we just use these really simple shapes, we can kind of establish a matrix. So let's say that we just kind of arbitrarily say that anything with 3 sides has a character state of 0, and anything with 4 sides has a character state of 1, and anything with 5 sides has a character state of 2. Then we can start to plot out, what is the character state of each one of these. So A being a triangle, we would call that 0. B being a sort of rhombus or a parallelogram, that would be a character state of 1 because it has 4 sides. The square would be 1, and the pentagons would be 2 because they have 5 sides. And then we establish sort of a key of our characters for the color. Let's just make blue 0 and orange 1. So someone pre-established these in case you're wondering, well, why would I call blue 0? Why wouldn't I call orange 0? This has just been pre-established by Carolina. So we come up with this nice matrix here. And what are we going to do with this matrix? Well, we can use it to establish relationships. So if we come down, let's say we propose a tree, a cladogram tree, so to speak. Basically what we can do here is we can figure out how many changes would it take to go from A to E. So A has our longest line here, and we would call that our out group because it would be closest to the ancestor being at the bottom. And to go from A to B, we would need to have a change in number of sides, but we would also have to have a change in equal angles. Like we would actually go unequal angles, right? So number of sides and go unequal angles would give us species B. Let's just pretend it's a species. So to go from number of sides, if we take a look at our timeline here, remember time is kind of the one that has all the characters on it. We have number of sides happening here and a change in number of sides happening here. So that's 2 actual changes. And we know just from looking at the shapes that number of sides changes twice. It changes from 3 to 4 and 4 to 5. So minimum number of changes there. Let's say it doesn't go 3 to 4 to 5 to 4 to 5, right? Let's just say it's linear and it goes 3 sides to 4 sides to 5 sides. The minimum number of changes there would be 2. Color, we know there's 2 colors. So we know the minimum number of changes is that the color change happens once. If we look at our timeline, how this is plotted out, we only see that it was plotted out 1 time. So the actual changes is also 1. Equal angles, that trait I see twice on the timeline. So equal angles, the actual changes I see twice. The minimum number of changes though, the minimum could be 1 because we have, E has equal angles, D has equal angles, C has equal angles, A has equal angles, B is the only one with unequal angles. So the minimum number of times that it had to change is 1. The minimum, that's not present in this tree, but the minimum number of times that it had to change was 1. So there's a difference there, right? There's a difference between what actually happened in the tree and the minimum number. The outline, it is kind of hard to see that double outline, but it's present in C and D. So I see it on my timeline. It happened right there and it happens right there. So since I see it twice, it changed twice on my timeline. And the minimum number of changes, there's either a double outline or a single outline. The minimum number of times it could change is 1. So having a little trouble with my annotation tool here. Here we go. So if we add up our actual changes, it's a 7. And the idea here is, can we get it less than 7? because the minimum number of changes is what we believe occurred, but can you make it happen in the tree? Can you make 5 changes like here? Could you make 5 changes show up in the tree? And it would be really hard. It's almost like solving a puzzle. So this tree presented 7 changes. The minimum number we're saying is 5 based on what we know. So our consistency index is 0.71. Now there's other ways to plot out this tree. There's other proposals that we could do. So a second proposal would be tree number 2. If we come down and take a look at tree number 2. I'll just kind of quickly here, if I go through this, we can see that the actual changes is 8. That's more than our last tree. That's not really good. We want minimum number of changes. That's going to follow what we call the principle of parsimony. And hopefully you saw Paul Anderson's video because he addresses that. And it's also addressed in this background here of this lab. The minimum number of changes that we can physically plot out is what we would actually believe to have occurred in evolutionary time. So here we can see this tree. I mean, if you go to compare it to tree 1, it is slightly different. They've put the pentagons in a different spot. So again, you would go through and count how many times things changed on the timeline, which is right here, and then how many times they would actually change. So you'll see, what you'll notice is minimum number of changes is the same in every tree that we propose for these shapes, because it's the theoretical. It's like, this is the theoretical, this is the actual. Okay, so again, minimum number of changes we're getting is 5, but if we could find a tree that shows just 5, that would be great, but it's actually really challenging. So they showed you one with 7, they're showing you one with 8, and there's one more. They have one more for tree number 3, where if you look, the shapes are going to change sort of their order again. Pentagons are going to change to be right after A, which is an interesting proposal. And what you really want to look for here is, again, that total number of actual changes, And here it's a 7 again. So we have 2 trees that propose 7 changes, 1 tree that proposes 8. We want to follow the least amount of changes. So 1 or 3, tree number 1 or 3 would be our most parsimonious tree. And if you're not sure what I mean when I say parsimonious, you need to look down here where it talks about the principle of parsimony. Is that the simplest solution is the most likely. The simplest solution is the most likely. And it goes into some description about how tree 1 and tree 3 could both be following the principle of parsimony, whereas tree number 2 just has a little too many changes. This is tree number 4. So right away, what you should notice is with tree number 4, we're having even less changes. And what they've done is they've done some extra branching here. So we're getting 6 actual changes. Okay, that is going to be our lowest so far. Minimum change is still 5. Everything here for the minimum is still the same as it's been. But here, what we're getting is this, we're getting a branching here where there was an ancestor here. We're getting a branching here where there would be an ancestor there. There would even be an ancestor to all of them right here. So this is a really nice tree. And now that we've seen tree 4 looks like our most parsimonious. So it looks like tree 4 is probably the winner. That would make the most sense. So how's this going to play out? Well, this is showing you here how this might look in some real organisms. Okay, some real organisms. So I'm just going to go through this tree just to kind of explain what it means, and then we'll talk about the lab. So these are organisms in the animal kingdom. You have a lancelet, a shark, a perch, a sparrow, and a mouse. And as you're going through time, we can see what parts would have evolved. So a lancelet is a type of fish that would be I believe it's a jawless fish. So you can see here the establishment of the notochord, which would be a really rough sort of spinal cord, is going to lead to everything else. So everything else above notochord has a notochord. A lancelet does not. A shark does not have bones, so you can see that the bones are after the shark. A perch does have a shark. I'm sorry, a perch does have bones. A sparrow would have lungs and is actually a tetrapod where it would have 4 limbs. And we can see that the mouse would have fur and mammary glands because it's a mammal, whereas up here, there's a little notation for where feathers would kick in for the sparrow. So this kind of shows the establishment of sea creatures to land creatures, and then, of course, birds. So all of these would be characters. This is our timeline. The whole thing is a cladogram, and it just goes to show through evolutionary time that there would be an ancestor here, and that lancelet would be the outgroup because it does not contain the characters that are listed. It has the least number of characters. Now, because we know that DNA and RNA and proteins are used as comparisons instead of just using features, it's kind of like saying, well, you can know 2 humans that look alike, but that doesn't mean that they're related. So it's the same for other organisms as well. Just because they look alike doesn't mean that they are related. So here, it's proposing some fake DNA sequences to these shapes. Now we know shapes obviously don't have any DNA, but what if these were organisms? Where would we find the differences in their DNA sequences? And we can see here, starting with the 3rd spot, we see that B and C do not have any nucleotide there. We can see here in the 6th spot that there's a G for the triangle where there's T for everything else. The 12th spot has no nucleotide for anything but the triangle. So it's like you're just trying to find the differences, finding the columns that have nucleotide differences. And within those differences, that's where you're going to find the DNA relationship with organisms. And they've even picked out the ones here. So they've separated them. Spot 3, spot 6, spot 12, spot 15, 22, and 23 all really show the differences here between these potential organisms, even though we know that these are just shapes, but they're trying to treat them as if they were like organisms. Okay. So what is that going to mean for us? Well, so what we have going on here is it goes into how that DNA can be put into a matrix like so. Okay, and you can read over that, and it's going to start to show you how you can make a parsimonious tray out of it. So in your kit, there should be 7 mollusk shells. Okay, and they are very fragile. They're very dainty. I showed them to my kids, and I was actually afraid they were going to break them. So even as much as I wanted them to be a little curious about it, I was actually a little nervous that they were going to snap some of them right in half. So we have Babylonia, Mercenaria, Murex. Okay, and here's some traits about these shells. So your first 3 here, and it gives you some descriptions, and that's really all that you're going to be able to use is descriptions because we're not taking any DNA from them. This is just the shell. It doesn't have the living organism, but it does say Using the shells and the descriptions, compile a list of potential characters and define character states for each character. Choose an outgroup and assign the character states numbers based on assigning 0 as the character state number possessed by the outgroup. So if you go back to looking at when we did the shapes, the one that was kind of like the first one to evolve, the triangle, was given the character state of 0 for everything. So here, whatever one that you think is going to be like the outgroup, the one that has the least amount of characters compared to the others, has to be considered the outgroup, okay? And it gives a lot of nice descriptions here. And then you want to move on. And one thing that I would note here is that the Babylonia is listed as being toxic. And I don't see that listed for the other two. So that's a nice difference there. That's a nice difference there. You want to really keep an eye out for the differences. Now we have Scuria, Turritella, Dentalium, and Argopectin. So again, you want to kind of note what are their descriptions, what are their characteristics, where do they live, what are their locomotion like, and start to establish like who's kind of the one that doesn't seem to belong. That's the one that your outgroup is. Your outgroup should be the one that really shares almost no characteristics to anything else. Now, what you're going to see is that instead of filling out this table, I have made tables for you in Google Slides. And you are going to have to come up with the characters that you chose. It gives you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think it gives you just a ton of areas to write characters in. You may not fill all of those out, and that's okay. That's okay. But in order for you to really have enough room, I'm going to go back here so that you can see what I've come up with. So there's a Google link here, and it does say that once you click on this, you're going to have to click make a copy. Okay, so once all this pops up for you, you want to go to File, Make a Copy. And it may prompt you to use your Google account. And if you don't have a Google account, which your email for the college should work as a Google account, but if it does not, you can just download this as a Microsoft Word document and you can type in it that way. So that's really your two ways of doing it. You can make a copy and do it as a Google Doc, or you can download it as a Microsoft Word doc. Once you do that, you're going to have to list your characters that you come up with. Like, what are some of the things that are options here? And then character state with numbers. So the outgroup has to be given 0. And then you want to establish some numbers from that, and then give, what would your matrix be for everything here? So let's kind of go to an example. I'm not saying that the example is going to work for you. Maybe you want to think outside the box here, but I definitely want to give you something to work with. So one of the things that I saw was, I think, locomotion. So let's go back. Take a look here. All right, so we have the types of locomotion are mobile, limited, mobile. Yeah, okay, so looks like everything is mobile except for Mercenaria. Now, I don't know if you're going to list Mercenaria as your outgroup. I don't know that you are. Again, I would have to I would have to look at everything together. But I'm just trying to give you an example here. So if locomotion is my character, then there was limited. There was only one with limited, so I would make that my 0. And I would make mobile 1. And then I would know that Scuria was a 1. Then Thallium was a 1. Mercenaria, I believe, was the 0, if I remember correctly. And then everything else was a 1. So that's how you would start to fill out your matrix. And that's just one character. And you might be thinking, well, like, how many do I need to have? I would think you could come up with a good 5 or 6 at least. You know, the more you can come up with, the better. But you want to go with, you know, what do these things look like? You know, what are some commonalities? You could definitely do, let's see, the diet is listed as carnivorous, filter feeding, predator. Remember that the 1 is toxic, so you would have toxic versus non-toxic. Scrapes algae from rocks, detritus feeder, filter feeder. So that one's going to be a little bit challenging. Diet is going to be a little bit challenging just because there's so many options. Filter, detritus feeder, predator, filter feeder, carnivorous, and then the random one of scrapes algae from rocks. So, you know, you could probably put that in there somehow, but you have a lot of options for diet. So diet could be used. You just have to be very careful how many categories you're making. And of course, you have habitat here. You have all of these on this page are marine habitat. And then all of these are marine habitat. So somehow you have to differentiate. You know, how are we going to differentiate the habitat if they're all marine? So we can see muddy sand, mud or sand, mud. So it's going to take a little bit of time to try to figure it out. And keep in mind that some of them say that the color varies. So you can't necessarily go by the one that's in your packet. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're picking enough characteristics. And again, you know, I would definitely take advantage of this toxic one. Okay, there is only one that's toxic, but you should be able to take advantage of that one and kind of figure out, you know, some character traits for everything. And of course, there's differences in distribution. There's Atlantic, Pacific, Indo-Pacific, Caribbean. So again, you're going to have a lot of options there as well. So coming back to the lab, once you have all that done, you, in the Google Doc, you will need to list the characters, and you're going to need to plot them out onto this tree here. I may even make this tree a little bit bigger. So what you might have to do is when you go to, there should be an option to make it bigger. Let's see. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to go in and just make these bigger for you guys. But what you'll do is you'll have to try to plot it out onto the tree and then list the characters and then their actual changes and their minimum changes, just like we looked at with the shapes. So you'll have to somehow like put in, you know, what character goes where into the charts. So that's why I have to put this into a bigger slide here. So you'll be able to do that. Now, trying to make this as streamlined as possible for you guys. There's this one, there's this tree, and then there's another tree. So you want to plot out, you know, where would your characters fall on these trees? So if I kind of make this a little bit bigger. I've just made my whole screen bigger, but I'm going to change this so that you guys have better access to it. So again, you would need to sort of put in here, and you can do that with probably insert horizontal line. Okay, that did not do what I wanted it to do. Okay, so really quickly just now, I altered this to have a bigger tree in it. And if you're using Google Docs unfortunately makes it very challenging to draw in an image when it is in a Google Doc. So the idea here is that you sort of make little slash marks in the tree where your characters are, and that you indicate where that character would fall in your tree. So those of you that are doing this on Google Docs, I have tried to figure out a workaround on this, and it is just super duper challenging. Um, what I would suggest that you do, even if you wanted to hand draw this very neatly and try to put in the characters, I would accept a hand drawing and then you could upload that drawing. But I do want the chart filled out in the Google Doc. So I would like the chart filled out in the Google Doc. As far as the tree itself, Google Docs just makes it super duper challenging to draw in Google Docs. If you're doing this as Microsoft Word, there's good news for you, because in Microsoft Word, you just have to use your draw tool and you can draw right on, right on this picture here. So if you do it as Microsoft Word, you'll have greater success. And again, you go to Microsoft Word by clicking on File, hitting Download, and making it a Microsoft Word document. So the idea here is that I'm really trying to make this easy for those of you who cannot write in a PDF file. And I've tried a couple workarounds on this, and I just can't seem to make Google Docs do what I want it to do. So once you get to the second tree, and I'm not really sure why this has such a big block in it. But once you get to that second tree, which is down here, I made the second tree bigger as well. And it's a rearrangement to show you a different outgroup. You want to put your characters in it again and try to figure out, what would be the most parsimonious tree, and your characters and actual changes and minimum changes. Now remember, the minimum changes between the two trees should be the same, just like it was in the shapes. They should be the same numbers. They are the theoretical changes, but with actual changes, you will have to go by the tree. How many times did that change have to occur to get that organism? And then you want to calculate your consistency index. So this document here is so that it's a little bit easier for you. Do not forget to open your share settings for you Google users. Make sure that you're sharing it with me. You can just, open them up, and you could share it with cccnj.edu. I believe that that is still attached to a Google document. So it would be mcastone@cccnj.edu. And that should work. Okay, until that email account closes. Those of you who can write in PDF files, congratulations, because not everybody can, not everybody has the software for it. But you could just, use your Carolina documents. But, I do want you guys to have a typed document here. The only part that I would accept not typed is the additions to those trees. Okay, and that would be the COI tree right here and the 16S tree, which is also found in the Google Docs. So that's your deliverable. Your deliverable for this, if we go back, is the trees, the Google Docs, the character matrix. Okay, it says fill out the tables, make sure that you're sharing your file with me, and please contact me with any questions. Okay, you only have a couple more labs left to do. And, this one can be a challenge. You might have to go back to it. You might have to rearrange some things, but it is kind of like solving a puzzle. Okay, so please contact me if you have any issues.